Hello, I'm Jim Falk, and thank you so much for joining us. Why in the United States, the richest country in the world, do we have 580,000 individuals who are homeless? Homelessness is an extremely complicated topic, as you will learn today, that brings forth strong feelings, whether it is citizens concerned about visible homelessness in their neighborhood, park, or urban center, or the person who finds themselves without the security of shelter. In today's program, we discuss the roots of homelessness, learn about the assistance being provided by local, state, and the federal government, and talk about solutions. Bottom line, can we eliminate homelessness? Joining me here in our studio are Joli Angel Robinson and Carol Lucky. Joli is the president and CEO of Housing Forward, a nonprofit founded in 2002 to serve as the collective voice for homelessness in Dallas and Collin Counties. Carol is the CEO of North Texas Behavioral Health Authority, and she's been working in the mental health and substance use field for over 40 years. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite.
So I believe each January here in Dallas and really across the country, you do a count, almost truly a census. Bring us up to date about what you discovered here in Dallas and Collin County this year, Joli.
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for inviting us to have this conversation. I'm so excited to be here with my peer, Carol Lucky, on this panel to talk a little bit more about the issue of homelessness. Our annual, it's what's called the annual point in time count, is a federally mandated opportunity that we have each year that we have to engage our unhoused population in a way that we get an overall understanding about the demographics, age, race, perhaps how long individuals have been experiencing homelessness, or some of the types of questions that we ask individuals. We did this year's annual point in time count. We had volunteers that allow us to go out. We have street outreach workers that engage people across Dallas and Collin County, not only taking a look at individuals that are unhoused or unsheltered is what it's called, but those that are in shelters as well. We count those numbers. And so this last year, we saw about 4,200 individuals were experiencing homelessness across Dallas and Collin Counties.
Is that an increase or a decrease from the
prior years? It's a slight decrease. Last year, we saw about 4,400 individuals experiencing homelessness across Dallas and Collin County. So we did see a slight decrease, specifically around our unsheltered population, meaning those outside. We've had some really targeted interventions and funding that's allowed us to really serve that population well.
Let's talk demographics. I'm sure you have a lot of these statistics in your head. Yeah. Do we see more blacks, whites, Asians? How does that break down?
We do, unfortunately, for us in our population, we see a huge overrepresentation of Black men specifically, not affiliated with, or not, they don't have children, they're not married, but it's just Black men that are overrepresented in our population. And when we say overrepresented, we talk about a disproportionate number of them than what we see in our general population.
What about veterans? We know that there are so many veterans that have served courageously and live in our community.
Yeah. Just like our general population, you see all of those populations represented in our unhoused numbers. So you see youth represented in our unhoused numbers. You do see veterans, those that have served courageously. As a military brat, I have a really special place in my heart for veterans. And so similar to others, it really pains us when we see those that have served our country that are having to rely on the assistance and service of others, but we're here to do it. We have very strong veterans partners that are amazing at the work that we do. We see seniors represented in our unhoused population, and we see a variety of other individuals similar to our larger population that we see in our unhoused numbers.
Sure. Well, let's bring Carol in the conversation, because one of the things that I assume is that so many of the homeless have at the roots mental issues, mental disease. Is that an accurate conclusion?
There are many people with who are homeless who also have mental illness, as we would call it, but they're not necessarily homeless because of mental illness. Mental illness happens across all populations, across all socioeconomic groups, across all races, and most people who have mental illness are not simultaneously homeless. However, if you find yourself in that situation and you're living in a life that's really full of poverty, if you have mental illness, it's going to exacerbate your symptoms. There's no way to live with that kind of stress without having your symptoms become more I guess, extreme.
And more difficult to get health services.
Right. We do a lot of outreach. We serve a lot of individuals who have homelessness. So services, at least in this area, are, I think, fairly widely available if we can get the person to the services. Doing things like remembering to take your medications when you don't live by the clock like we do can be very, very difficult. Remembering to go pick it up, remembering to keep an appointment, getting to an appointment as necessary. Now, we are looking at ways to improve that situation. A lot of telemedicine, Apple iPads going out to the places where the individuals are so they can meet with doctors or therapists as needed. So there's a lot of ways we can look to improve that situation. But yes, people with mental illness do experience homelessness, but I don't think that it is the absolute root cause.
How do they access your services?
Through really referrals from anywhere. North Texas Behavioral Health Authority has not said no to anyone yet, which is, I think, marvelous. We serve about 34,000 people a month throughout this region.
So do people come into a clinic, or again, you're taking people out to the streets or where the homeless
Yes and yes.
are? Yes.
Yes, we work with a lot of peers who are doing services, community health workers who are doing outreach to access these individuals and let them know what services are available. Most of the peers have experience in their own lives with either homelessness, mental health issues, or substance use disorders. So, and sometimes all three. They often go together. So they actually have a way of, I think, relating to the individuals that they run into and can help them understand that it's available. They're less threatening sometimes than
Sure.
those of us who look more corporate.
So you've been in this field for a long time, and I'm old enough to remember in the 1980s that you used to see mental hospitals, even the word asylum, and most of those were closed in the 80s for a variety of reasons. Did that make a difference? And do you view that really negatively, what happened in the 80s?
You know, and I do remember the 80s, unfortunately, and that
Joli
was
doesn't, but that's okay.
that was quite a shift
Yeah.
in how we treat people. But also from the 80s forward, we've improved our medications a lot. There's been improved treatment protocols. Hospitals still play a role in what we do. They're just generally not as long term, except for those individuals who are medication resistant or potentially may be involved in the justice system. Those are the folks who need to stay longer.
Joli, what are the reasons that people end up homeless? I mean, clearly we think of the fact that someone's lost their house, but there are other reasons. And I know we're going to talk quite a bit about affordable housing because that's something that you're particularly focused on. But what are some of the other reasons that frankly give people, in their mind, no choice but to become unsheltered?
Yeah, and that's a hard decision to make, to have to be put in that position where you're choosing or you're having to make the choice between living somewhere, going to a shelter, or with no other option to turn to or to be unhoused, live in your car, or out in an encampment. I do have to give a huge kudos to Carol and the North Texas Behavioral Health team. They've done an amazing job. I mentioned inclement weather just briefly before, but when we stand up inclement weather shelter sites across Dallas and Collin County, when the temperatures dip really low here, her team comes out. When we talk about outreach on the ground, that's one way to the question that you asked, how do people get connected? That's one way. Her and her team, they go out to individuals experiencing homelessness at those sites and engage them in the process of getting them connected. So I do have to give a huge kudos and shout out to the work that they do.
Thank you.
Yes, when we talk about pathways to homelessness, really, to the question that you asked, it's a variety of reasons why people end up there. And I am very honest, any one of us can end up there. As some really great documentaries have shown, we are all usually one crisis away from being unhoused, whether that's a loss of jobs, and this is what we see. So even when we're engaging individuals during the point in time count, or when we're engaging people every day, we get to hear those stories. We get to hear about job loss that snowballed. We hear about perhaps they were married and their spouse passed away and their spouse was the primary breadwinner. And so then it leaves the other spouse with no other opportunity. Perhaps they didn't have children to move in with, or they didn't have family to reach out to be that social safety net. One of the main things that we talk about as a really really a main driver is the lack of social safety net. Most of us have that. I have a mother and a stepfather who've done an amazing job.
That idea that you should have at least 6 months of your salary or what you need in the bank.
Or you're only paying 30%.
Do you remember a few years ago, and they may still do it every year, where the food bank would have that billboard on the tollway that said you could be only one paycheck away from needing the food bank?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the same for us in our space. People are losing job. Maybe there's a health care emergency that has happened and people have been hospitalized and they get out and they've lost their job, they've lost their car, or they've lost their home. And then there's just no other opportunity or no other avenue they have. And so there's a variety of different reasons that people these pathways to homelessness is where they find themselves.
Obviously we know that homeless is not a good situation to be in, but take us really to the street about what happens to people who may be homeless, whether it's violence, sexual abuse.
It is a traumatic experience. You heard Carol mention the trauma of living outside, or the trauma of not knowing where your meal is going to come from day to day. And, we've talked quite a bit in our space about even the violence that doesn't necessarily happen within encampments, unhoused neighbor to unhoused neighbor, but sometimes they're often targeted by those outside of their own encampment. And so the safety reason and the concern about safety can be extremely problematic and traumatic for individuals. Where are you going to be safe? Where are you going to be able to sleep at night and you're not told to move along, or you're going to be able to hold on to your important documents is challenging for that population.
One of the things that I found really interesting when I looked at the number of homeless in different states, California had a very high number per 100,000. Texas was 90 per 100,000. Which was, a good 300-400 less than California. So, at one level I go, hey, this is great. Texas is doing a good job. Yeah. But if the number is 1, it's too many. But let me ask both of you, why do you think Texas has a much lower number than, say, California or New York or some other states? And a lot of the southern states, and maybe it has to do with weather or employment, has a much lower number than California or Hawaii.
I can start.
Take a stab at it.
Yeah. So cost of living really is, when we boil everything down, all things equal. All things equal, cost of living really is the driver. So we generally, most of us don't feel it now, but we generally have lower housing costs. We have lower living costs. We are a lot more spread out with potentially a lot more different housing options for people across the income spectrum. If you visited any of these other places, the cost of living is extremely high. And so people may be able to be here, live here, hold on to maybe 1 or 2 jobs that would just cover the rent enough, because our rent hasn't at this moment kept up with the astronomical rise.
But it certainly has been increasing here.
It has. And we know people are feeling the pinch, yes.
But Texas has put in some laws and regulations that really work against the homeless. And isn't there one law in particular where there's like only 2 states that permit this?
Yes.
Tell our audience about that. That was surprising.
Yeah, you're referring to, there's, people call it different things. The way I refer to it is source of income discrimination. Landlords don't have to take a voucher here in Texas. They do not have to take a rental subsidy. And when we're engaging our populations, housing is extremely important. Housing is important for mental health. Housing is important as the solve for
So what you're saying, in
individuals.
Texas, they do not have to take the voucher where they do in 48
Absolutely.
other states.
48 other states, they have to take a voucher or they have to take a rental subsidy. But in our state legislation or bills, they do not have to take it. They are protected from not taking those things. And so even for us in our system, if we wanted to end an individual's homelessness and we have a voucher that would cover their rent, a landlord could still say, no, I'm not interested. I'm not taking a voucher.
That's an interesting form of redlining, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Is that something you're working on, or people that you work with to try to change that legislation?
Absolutely, and we have a wonderful partner at the state level, the Texas Homeless Network, and they do a lot of great advocacy work to help us continue to talk about some of those things that are negatively impacting our system.
So one thing, you don't have to drive very far around Dallas or some other major cities in Texas or elsewhere to use the word gentrification, especially in Oak Cliff. I remember seeing all those sort of single small homes, and now they're either mid-rise or whatever. That must have an impact too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I use the term displacement. So most of us in this kind of affordable housing space, and we're really passionate about, we want to see development. We want to see inclusive development in Oak Cliff and areas beyond. What is really hard and challenging and impacts our system as well is the displacement that may happen because of that ongoing development. And so we really try to advocate for ways that people are able to stay in place, right? Maybe it's our older population, property taxes are rising, and so hopefully there's guardrails that can allow an individual to stay in place, age in place, take advantage of all the development opportunities that are happening perhaps around them, but they're not being displaced.
Another issue I'd like either one of you to talk about. Imagine if you're looking for a job and you may not have high skills, but there's some work that you can do, and they say, where do you live? Or how can you get to this location? Are either one of your organizations providing opportunities and services to help people get to a job? And also, how do employers look at it when someone says, I don't have an address?
I think that is a very negative factor that employers hold against people. It's very difficult to apply for a job if you don't have a home. For various reasons, you need to have access to a shower, you need to have some kind of transportation to get to wherever that job may be. And in this area, that can be very difficult. The train doesn't go everywhere, the buses don't go everywhere. Job skills are also a problem.
Well, I remember when they'd opened up that nice development in Legacy and all the restaurants, they had a real issue getting servers to go there, and they had to, I think, put in place special buses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I do think that right now we have some opportunity because there are jobs out there if people are willing to hire our folks and we're willing to or able to get them the skills needed to do the jobs that are available. We keep hearing, I can't hire, I can't hire, I can't hire. Well, there are people, but we need to do things to get them the skills. We need to get them housed so they can feel able and capable of getting up and keeping to a schedule and getting to a job. The skills need to be there to do that job. And we have some barriers as well. A lot of our folks or people who are homeless do have some kind of criminal record. And employers do look at that. And that can be a barrier in a world that bases ourselves on a lot of forgiveness. We don't forgive even small crimes of someone's past.
I remember, and I'm sure a lot of you are subscribers to Nextdoor or other social media, and where I am, you see in Nextdoor about a week or two ago, just incredible chain of vitriol against the homeless because there was an issue of panhandling and setting up these encampments. What are your thoughts about panhandling and providing support to folks who are on the median on Northwest Highway?
Yeah. So our system tries not to conflate the two. You may see somebody that's on the median, on the corner with a sign that says, I am homeless, I'm a veteran. Those aren't always true. So when we think about our unhoused population, we're not thinking about those that others would consider panhandlers. Unless you are engaged in a process either at a shelter or maybe the point in time count where we know that you are unsheltered, we try not to conflate the two, although the sign may say otherwise, that individuals are holding.
I'm sure you're asked this a lot.
I am asked it a lot. I am asked it a lot. And, I always tell people, if you think someone is experiencing homelessness, we have a homeless crisis helpline that's on our website people can direct individuals to. There are a plethora of shelters, again, as I've mentioned, or direct service providers that you can direct individuals to. We're also asked, how do I engage? Should I give a care package? Should I give money? And I tell people all the time, you give the way your heart feels led to give. The way I choose to give is to a direct service provider, perhaps a shelter, maybe it's a domestic violence shelter or a youth shelter. I choose to give to those individuals directly so I know that they can serve those individuals individuals that are either looking for services or coming.
Does
in
it worry you, and are you against the criminalization of some of these activities?
I am. I'm against the criminalization of some of these activities because it doesn't make it easier. If you give a fine to someone that's a panhandler,
They can't pay it
they
anyway.
can't pay it anyway. It might end up being a warrant. They might get arrested. They might be put in jail. They're going to be right back out. Or if there's someone that's living in a camp, we have a camping ban here in the state that was passed not too long ago. If you give someone a ticket and a fine and they get arrested, how is that going to help them get connected to services?
And I might also add that there's a huge social expense to having someone arrested, put in jail, whether they stay long or process out for a crime that they can't pay the fine for and a crime that they can't help, let's say, criminal trespass.
And it's taking a lot of time away and resources from fighting perhaps other crimes.
Right, we could spend that money better.
Carol, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. How do we change our mindset that being poor is not that person's fault in most cases, or in many cases?
I think that's a really hard one. That's such a huge social question. But the best way to do it is, I think, to know people. Know the peers, let them speak out of people who have experienced homelessness and come out on the other side, have found homes, have found jobs. They're, I think, a huge testimony for us to look at and understand. And I think we need to understand the resilience of these individuals, both individuals who have mental illness or substance use disorders or who have experienced homelessness, and think, could I have had the resilience to live through that and make it? It is quite a challenge, and maybe there should be some respect for those who actually improve their life situation or with assistance. Asking people to do that alone is a huge challenge.
Joli, I understand congratulations are in order, I guess, for Dallas and particularly for Housing Forward. I read that you recently received a significant competitive grant from a HUD. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, over the course of the last couple of years, we've really been doing some tremendous system transformation work here locally. And I have to say a huge kudos and thank you to all of our partners that have made that happen. Housing Forward doesn't do it in isolation. We're a team of about 35, but there's been a $23 million over the course of 3 years that we've received funding. We've received $22 million from HUD as well. And all of this helps us focus on focus our efforts. One of the funding, $23 million over 3 years, that's allowed us to focus on unsheltered homelessness. HUD really saw from some of the national data from the annual point in time count from cities across the nation that our unsheltered population was going up. And so they provided this additional funding that allows us to really make some targeted
How will
work.
the money be used?
So we've already, there's several direct service providers that it'll go to directly. We're going to increase our permanent supportive housing opportunities and options for individuals. We know, we've talked about how housing is a solution, and we know that for many of our unsheltered or chronic unhoused individuals, that the only solve will be a permanent solution to their housing. That means it's going to be permanent. That means there's supportive services that are there, because we know that wraparound services really is the difference maker, and that's housing that's attached. So that's how some of that funding will
So
be
that's
used.
your focus on housing. But what about, Carol, those people who really don't want to live under a roof?
That is a unique group of people, and I think sometimes, at least in my world, Joey may disagree, you have to accept people's choices. And if that's the choice they make, and they've had the chance for intervention, opportunities, they've been educated, then if they still make that choice, most don't.
Exactly.
Most do not. Most people, when they realize that there's options, when they maybe start believing in themselves to say, I can make a change, I can do better, I can have comfort in my life, will make that change.
Both of you have talked a lot about partners. You've talked about partner organizations. You've talked about volunteers. Give us a sense of what we can do. What can I as an individual do to combat this scar?
And we'll back up real quick. The peers I'm talking about are paid peers.
Okay.
These are individuals that have been trained to provide this service. So they're educated in the outreach business. They're not volunteers.
But I'll come back and say they're giving a lot.
They are giving a lot, and they work a lot of hours, and they're on call for things like
So
shelters.
again, what can we do to help you?
Honestly, education, sharing information with your friends, maybe posting against your vitriol on Nextdoor, spreading the message. Funding, of course, is always important. My world is very, very focused on professional intervention, so there's less opportunity for volunteer work than there might be in some other aspects. But I think we need to spread the word. We need to become more understanding as a culture, and
Empathy is an important word.
empathy would be the word. Yes, thank you.
Jolie?
3 simple things, not so simple. Take it as you would like. Volunteer, advocate, and donate. Everyone has a lane. Everyone has something that they can do. Whether you volunteer at a shelter, inclement weather, or just a shelter that stays open every day. Advocate for housing, affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. Some of the issues that we see that are making it even more challenging, we just ask that everyday folks make a call, send an email to your elected officials, and let them know how much you support the work that's happening for us to be able to serve our neighbors experiencing homelessness.
Jolie, you have a tough job. You see a lot of misery in the community. How do you sort of disassociate yourself from it at the end of the day?
It's hard to. I talk very openly about my birth father who had been unhoused for about 12 plus years, and it's hard to disassociate. But the thing that brings me joy and hope are people like Carol, are people like the peers, are people like our direct service providers and shelter providers that are doing the incredibly hard work each day to serve our unhoused neighbors.
Carol, give me 30 seconds about what you think is the biggest misperception about homelessness and mental illness.
I think one of the biggest misperceptions is that people who have mental illness are dangerous. They're frightening. They're scary. In reality, people who have mental illness are more likely to be victimized than they are to victimize someone else. So these are people that are just like you and me, and they're just like your neighbors.
Well, look, I really thank both of you for coming into the studio. Ending homelessness benefits humanity. And as you have heard from our 2 experts, the reason why individuals find themselves without reliable and safe shelter are varied. Providing affordable housing without restrictions is key, as is access to transportation, public health services, and removing obstacles to employment. While considerable progress is being made, homelessness remains a scar on our society, one where continued bold leadership, empathy, and creative solutions are required. Thank you for watching today's program, where, as always, we talk about things that matter with people who care.